Did you know that LG's C-Series OLED has been the best-selling OLED TV in the world over the past few years, and the latest 2025 edition, namely the LG C5, appears to be the brightest C-Series OLED yet. HDR peak brightness on our 55-inch review sample measured 1150 nits on a 10% window after calibration to D65 white point, and 220 nits full fill, which is very impressive considering that the C5 is only equipped with an OLED EX panel, albeit a high brightness one, instead of an MLA or 4-stack WOLED panel. Together with OLED's pixel level light control and the TV's highly accurate PQ-EOTF tracking in HDR filmmaker mode even out of the box, this allowed for a faithful reproduction of the creative intent in most HDR titles graded up to 1000 nits. Like all LG OLEDs, the C5 adapted its tone curve to max CLL metadata to retain more specular highlight detail in 4000 nit HDR content, though some highlight compression was inevitable since the TV's peak brightness doesn't come anywhere close to 4000 nits. SDR color accuracy was excellent after only a quick 2-point calibration without needing to utilize AutoCal, with an average delta error of below 1 on this Color Checker SG chart where 140 patches were measured, and no inaccuracies exceeding the humanly perceptible threshold of delta error 3, translating to natural and cinematic-looking colors in real-world content. Note that the default OLED pixel brightness value of 80 in SDR filmmaker mode yielded a peak white of 330 nits with all eco settings disabled, so you may want to manually lower the TV's brightness for a more comfortable viewing experience in a dimly lit room. Talking of watching in a dark room, the LG C5 suppressed near-black chrominance overshoot effectively, especially in pristine content, helped by the diagonal line deterring algorithm developed by WOLED panel supplier LG Display, which first made an appearance on last year's G4 MLA OLED. For HDR color rendition, DCI-P3 color gamut coverage reached 99% in UV terms, whereas REC 2020 coverage was 76%, in line with WOLED panels we've tested in recent years without primary RGB tandem OLED technology. Nevertheless, LG's dynamic color boosting algorithm worked effectively to prevent color luminance at high brightness levels from deviating too far away from reference. The LG C5 uses a chipset codenamed O22N3, which is a bit long in the tooth, since the O22 chipset first debuted on the C2 and G2 back in the year 2022, causing the C5 to exhibit many of the same behaviors in terms of video and motion processing. Upscaling was good but not as sharp as the flagship LG G5, though the C5 did not appear to apply always-on microcontrast enhancement either, which may appeal to purists including myself. Video mode interlacing to suppress jaggies, as well as film mode interlacing for both 3.2 and 2.2 cadences were of high quality without any notable issues to report. Native 10-bit gradation was not as clean as that seen on QD-OLEDs, with some posterization seen in the skies of the Martian 4K Blu-ray, not to mention a rippling effect during fade to blacks. You can engage the smooth gradation decontouring filter to smooth out the posterization, but because the higher you go, the more the fine detail that would be erased, so we wouldn't go higher than the least aggressive setting of low, especially when watching pristine content. Even with True Motion disabled, the LG C5 correctly performed 5.5 pull-down to display 24 frames per second movies accurately without hallucinogenic judder. The mild stutter inherent in 24p films wasn't obvious on our 55-inch review sample, but if you are sensitive to this issue, particularly on larger screen sizes, you can set True Motion to cinematic movement, which worked well to smooth out the 24p stutter without introducing too apparent a soap opera effect or SOE. While engaging True Motion frame interpolation could boost motion resolution, thus reducing motion blur for watching sports, from time to time it would also introduce microstutter in 50Hz content, a legacy carryover from the O22 chipset. It's not easy to see the microstutter in a compressed YouTube video. So here's a slow motion video capture to show you exactly where the microstutter occurred during this 50Hz talk show program broadcast in the UK. Bright uniformity was typical of a WBE OLED panel, with our 55-inch review unit manifesting no visible banding or dirty screen effect, although some color tinting was noticeable along the edges, particularly on the left-hand side. As far as dark uniformity was concerned, there were also some thin vertical streaks on full-field gray slides just above black, and interestingly, larger blotches of slightly brighter discoloration across the screen, though the latter wasn't really visible in real-world content, even some of the most challenging ones. For gaming, input lag in Game Optimizer mode measured 13 milliseconds at 60 FPS, which could be lowered to just over 9 milliseconds with boost mode enabled. At 120 FPS, input lag would drop even further to under 5 milliseconds, similar to LG OLEDs over the past few years, ranking among the fastest we've recorded on a consumer TV. LG OLED TVs have been the first on the market to support 4K 120Hz Dolby Vision gaming, and the C5 doesn't deviate from this tradition. However, Dolby Vision Game Optimizer mode was still over-brightened versus PQ out of the box, so we would rather disable Dolby Vision for gaming on the Xbox Series X and just play in HDR10 with source-based tone mapping set correctly. Talking of which, HDRG support was well implemented on the C5, hard clipping at 1200 nits for both maximum tone map luminance and maximum full-frame tone map luminance to avoid subjecting compatible HDR games to unnecessary double tone mapping. The LG C5 supports all three mainstream VRR formats of HDMI Forum VRR, AMD FreeSync and NVIDIA G-Sync up to 144Hz to deliver buttery smooth gameplay without frame drops or tearing artifacts. Like every consumer OLED with VRR support we've tested, VRR flicker remained unavoidable in a handful of VRR games, especially during more sedate scenes and on static menus. The LG C5 would auto-detect a PC connection through one of its 4 HDMI ports with full HDMI 2.1 bandwidth of 48 gigabits per second, allowing the TV to reproduce full 444 chroma without any problem whatsoever. In Game Optimizer or PC mode, many picture settings including smooth gradation would be grayed out or non-functional, so the C5 would have to fall back on its native 10-bit gradation, which was decent, but not quite as smooth as that seen on QD-OLEDs, especially near black. The dynamic HDR color boosting algorithm is not available in Game Optimizer mode on the C5, causing brightly saturated colors to look more muted should you require the lowest latency for playing HDR games. One partial workaround is to use HDR Filmmaker mode with ALM enabled, and manually adjust the professional tone mapping settings to hard clip at all 3 mastering levels in order to simulate HDRG. However, even with this configuration, input lag remains slightly higher, measuring 21 milliseconds at 60 frames per second and 13 milliseconds at 120 FPS. Sound quality was well balanced, with decent bass and dialogue clarity for day-to-day viewing, but naturally can't match the audio performance of an external soundbar or home theater system. Let's sum up. The 55-inch C5 is LG's brightest C-Series OLED to date, delivering a visibly more impactful HDR presentation while remaining faithful to the creator's intent. Combined with outstanding color accuracy, superb video processing, impressive gaming credentials with low input lag, 4 HDMI 2.1 ports, multi-format VRR support and accurate HDRG implementation, the LG C5 is one of the best mid-range OLED TVs you can buy in 2025, and so it receives our highly recommended award. Its main competitor is the Samsung S90F, which, if equipped with a QD-OLED panel, will offer higher color luminance and superior native 10-bit gradation but won't support Dolby Vision. Though please be aware that in the UK and other European markets, only the 65-inch S90F will be QD-OLED. If you are not sure about which TV to buy, one place where you can get good advice is at Richer Sounds. a trusted British AV retailer with more than 50 stores in the UK, who provides 6 years warranty on the vast majority of TVs if you join the company's VIP club. You will get the best deals through cheaper VIP exclusive install-only prices, complimentary gifts or freebies, so go visit your local Richard Sounds store or call telesales for your next TV purchase. Thanks again for your support. Now, if you are considering buying the LG C5, you may wonder if you should get the Samsung S90F instead, in which case you should check out my full review video by clicking here.